Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, I guess, depending where you are in the world as this video is reaching you. This is the Presence Posse, and I'm here with my Presence Posse podcast partner, Dr. Fred Blum. And today we're going to be discussing presence and advice, both the giving and receiving of advice and the opportunities to practice presence in those moments, as well as maybe exploring if we can get quiet enough to listen to the inner advice that we're getting, those whispers of wisdom that come through to us when our mind is quiet and tranquil enough to be able to hear the message. So Fred, why don't you start by introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
Yeah, certainly. And sorry, it looks like my video is a little spotty. But in any case, my name, Dr. Fred Blum. I am a coach that works with, generally speaking, people who have achieved some level of success in the world and would like to have that kind of success in their personal lives, whether it be in their relationships or their own sense of well-being or whatever it may be, their health. And somehow, whatever the strategies were that made them successful in the world, don't seem to be working as well in those other arenas. And so I help them to kind of create that success everywhere that they want to have it.
Awesome. And as you think about presence and advice, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you, or kind of how does that subject land for you?
Yeah, the way it lands for me is something that I know I've said this a few times. It's actually a quote from, I think you probably know who Michael Neal is, Bobby.
Yeah.
Somebody who I'd spent some time around for a while some years ago. And Michael would say, I don't give advice because if someone is not already connected to what Michael calls your inner wisdom, if someone's not connected to their inner wisdom, they aren't really going to take my advice. And if they are connected to it, they don't need my advice.
I love that.
So I don't give advice like, here's what I think you should do, much in my work with clients or whatever, really, even in my life. I do try and point people back towards their own wisdom or self clarity, whatever you may call it, so that they can begin to see the situation more clearly with more perspective. Maybe tap into, you were talking about, you called it inner advice or something.
Yeah.
The idea of
inner wisdom,
intuition, inner knowing. And that I just feel like is a much more reliable way for people to go through their lives, not really counting on look, and let me differentiate for a moment. I'm talking about the kind of thing where it might be possible for you to come up with the answer yourself. So if like you have a real accounting problem or, you want to know how to build a spaceship or something, I probably wouldn't, unless, you were already very well versed in one of those areas, I wouldn't tell you to look within for the answers. So I think that advice is something that is very appropriate for, a technical issue or something like that, where it's just a question of, how do I do this? But for something regarding, how should I live my life, or, is this the, how do I become a happier, healthier, more loving human being? That's where I don't really think advice is as useful as helping them look within.
Yeah, although, when you brought up the example of accounting, my initial reaction is, and I think that this could be considered inner wisdom speaking, to one. My inner advice is I'm not going to fool with that. I'm going to go hire somebody to get the job done for me, because it's I guess it could be considered a competency, but it's definitely not something that I'm either good at or want to be doing. So
Right.
in some ways that kind of almost feels like just in that split second when you said that, that was like an immediate reaction, go hire somebody, uh,
Yeah.
as I'm listening to it. So that almost kind of seems like an inner knowing as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I see that too. I occasionally haven't ran a class in a while, but I teach other hypnotists and hypnotherapists a particular set of protocols that I use in the liberation hypnosis. And in that, we specifically don't give advice. It's about
Hmm.
the protocols are all designed to help somebody go within and access that advice and make a connection between the conscious mind and the
Hmm.
subconscious. And initially, as people are learning this, the undoing, the unknowing of the like reflexive urge to give advice is something that
Hmm.
quite a few people struggle with, and
Yeah.
for the poor last person in the class who's finally getting it, and everybody else has made the click. There's a little bit of a torture process because everybody's kind of like rolling their eyes and going, "Come on, we're not giving advice here. We're
Yeah.
we're teaching people how to um, go within." I, I um I've noticed recently. A year ago, I had surgery to have a tumor removed from my bladder. For
That's a year ago now already. Wow.
Yeah. I just saw the post actually on Saturday. I guess I made a post either that day or maybe it was before I went in. I didn't read the post, but it just showed up in a memory, and I'm like, oh wow, it's been a year already.
Mm.
It does not feel that. And when I was diagnosed, I shared it, and man, I received an enormous amount of advice. Everybody kind of seemed to have like just something that they thought I should be looking into, and I looked into actually I looked into all of them. Some of them I kind of went away from, and I really kind of appreciated it, even when some of the advice felt very far off the mark and not applicable. I still appreciated the fact that people were caring enough to offer the
Mm.
advice. And I have a friend now who had, has got a diagnosis about 6 weeks ago, and I'm finding myself reacting very differently to the advice that she's given. And there, one bit of advice, and I think this may be a function of the metaphysical community, is people told me, and they have told my friend Anne, you manifested this. So what you need to
Mm.
do is to go within and figure out what is the reason that you happen to manifest that. And that was advice that when I was receiving it, I was thinking, okay, that's your belief system. That's a comment. And it just didn't really feel helpful. And I found myself just kind of pushing it away, but not really reacting so much to it. But for some reason, as the similar thing is happening with my friend, I've witnessed people coming up to her and saying something like that. And it's a very different reaction for me. It
Mm.
is, I feel like intervening and saying, stop, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? How could this possibly be helpful? And I've been kind of like just exploring what's the difference, because I can remember people saying that, and it was like water off of a duck's back when it was coming my way. But for some reason, I find it agitating and aggravating when it's happening to my friend. But it's weird, and it's kind of one of those threads that I'm like to just explore what's going on here and why am I why am I reacting this way? And it's just a good opportunity for self inquiry.
Sure. I mean, everything's a good opportunity for self inquiry, I guess.
Yeah, it really
Um,
is.
and I mean, I'm not a fan of that. I mean, somebody would have to have an awful lot of permission with me before I'd really want that kind of, somebody talking about, oh, what did you do to create this kind of thing? Because they'd have to have a lot of credibility with me, I think, for me to
Yeah.
even consider entertaining that conversation. And I'm not even discussing, well, I think you said it really well. Like, I'm not even discussing whether it's true or not true, or I'm not, saying what other people's beliefs should be, but it's just not something that's generally, it's not helpful. That's what you said. I just don't think it's
Yeah.
helpful to have people do that. Um, I don't know exactly what it, when it comes to advice, there's always that element of, um, am I trying to fix someone? Am I trying to, you know, yeah, fix them? Like, I just don't think that what they're experiencing is what they should be experiencing. Um, uh, I think we talked about this once before on this podcast, but that my son was very overweight for 10 years of his life, between about the age of maybe 9 and I mean 8 and 17 or something, and for many years, both his mom and I tried to fix him, and that involved giving him a lot of advice about what he should eat or shouldn't eat, or how he should exercise, or this or that. And despite all our efforts, we watched his weight climb steadily for quite a few years. And um, at some point, I just knew I had to let it go. I knew that what I was trying to do wasn't working, and it was like an intuition, like you were saying before, that just said he's going to be fine. Let him alone. And it was like, okay, I was done trying to solve this, and I was done feeling bad about it, that somehow it was a reflection on me or whatever I had going on. And sure enough, and I won't get into the whole story of how it happened, but something clicked in his head at some point, and I remember it was a very specific moment, and he decided he was done. And the very next day, he joined the gym, and he uh, has lost to date a bunch, probably 75 or 80 pounds,
Wow.
and it was completely natural for him to do that because it was the right moment for him. And I think that a big issue, like telling someone, how did you manifest, or whatever this is that it's not, again, that any particular thing you might say to someone is right or wrong, but is it the right moment for that particular thing to be said, And I think to a large extent, that's relying on your own inner knowing. So if there's something that really occurs to me to say to someone, a client or whoever, uh, it, I mean, almost never will it come out in the form of advice. But I imagine if it did, like if I said, really, whatever, I'm just saying, I don't know if this is a good idea for you to do this or something. Um, Even that would be quite rare. But if it felt really strongly in me, then it might be something I would say still. Because again, it's just you trusting that there's something that's deeper running the show, some deeper wisdom coming through than just what I think you should or shouldn't do.
Yeah. It's and how you I think that's a great question to ask ourselves before we give advice is it welcome? Is it
Mm,
necessary? And do I have permission to give the advice? Because I can remember that as well with one person who's a very close friend of mine who was very compelled to want to give me a piece of advice, but just in her own personal view of the world, that's not anything that she would ever do without permission.
hmm
And
mm,
I really wasn't, I hadn't given her permission clearly enough in her mind for her to share what it was. And we kind of went round and round. And I finally, I finally caught on that, I'm just going to have to say, it seems like you have something to tell me, and I'm interested in hearing what it is.
oh, well, that's a nice
And
response.
it was, and it was a result of uh, like several conversations where she was, calling up and how are you doing? How can I help you? Um, how can I support you? That was one of her questions that I thought, wow, that's a pretty cool question. I
Yeah.
may add that to my toolbox there. And it was going so roundabout, and she was like putting it out there, but she just in her own wiring, she didn't want to be so direct to just come out and say, I've got a piece of advice I'd like to offer you. Are you open to receiving it? She wanted me to extend the invitation, and it took quite a while for me to catch on to that. And I think because of that, as it was occurring to me, it's finally like, you really seem like there's something that you want to say, and I do want to hear it. And it was good advice, which I took, and I'm still taking today. So, and
Mm,
it was interesting the fact that I sort of had to, there's an interesting thing when you give permission. You're not only opening the conversation, but I think to a degree you're also opening your mind, and
right.
or at least, and I'll merely say from my own experience, what I noticed was I was much more open to receiving the advice of the people who took a moment to ask permission rather than just blurting it out. And some of that was conditioning because part of it I recognize, like particularly with cancer, it's hard to know what to say, and I get that.
hmm
I mean, I've dealt with it, and I'm still, when the coin is flipped, I don't know exactly uh, what to say, and I try to get quiet and see what arises, and even if anything is necessary. But the people who just blurt it out, it's almost after a while, when you see them coming, it's like, your force field shields are on stun, and your guard is up, and it's kind of like, all right, I'm opening myself here. Who knows what's going to come out of this person's mouth, and how it's gonna hit. It's a quandary. How would you, for somebody who was looking to use this as a catalyst for self inquiry or self exploration, what would be some advice that you would give to somebody who's like, hey, I saw the podcast, Fred, and you were talking about it. You and Bobby were talking about it being a good place for self inquiry. How do I do that?
Well, here's one thing I want to say in response to something I heard you share a moment ago,
Okay.
and this might be a partial answer to your question too, but we'll get to both of them. I think the thing you said about permission, I think, is really important. Um, I some time back, I don't know, a few years maybe, created a model that I call 3 steps for effective inquiry, and the first step is willingness, which is very much like what you're saying about permission, I think. In other words, when I'm working with a client, or it really works the same with yourself, but let's use it with a client for a moment. It's like if we're about to really explore something, now we're not just talking, but like something comes up and I say, okay, this is something that might be useful to explore a little bit. I'll ask them explicitly, are you willing to do this? Now, you might say that that's implied, that their willingness is implied because they're sitting in that chair, or, they're paying me for that, whatever. And I think that's probably true. And kind of like what you said, there's something about when I find myself saying, yes, I'm willing, that I get more on board.
Yeah.
And you said something very similar to that when you were talking about permission. It's like there are parts of me that might be in resistance, unconsciously in resistance, that when I say acknowledge, yes, I'm willing, I think more of them come into alignment. And so I think that's really important that, we get that alignment before we begin any kind of really deep work, or usually, often there's a part of us that resists it, that tries to sabotage it or derail it or whatever. And each of those steps, by the way, of those 3 steps for effective inquiry has, I don't know what the best word is for it, but like a resource or a quality that sort of powers up that particular step. So for that step of willingness, the resource is courage. So when you say, and this is, I think, a little bit of an answer to your question as far as how would somebody begin to apply this. You really look, if I'm going to do inner work, and of course, the way I like to do it often is through the body. So if I'm going to really tune in and check in with how my body is reacting to some stressor or something somebody said or some fear I have about something, it's like if I really check in and I almost acknowledge or ask myself, am I willing? To be honest, I don't ask myself that much anymore, but I have asked it, just to create that alignment. And then I literally know that it takes courage in myself to look at this. It's going to require me to be strong, to be able to look at and sit in this thing that feels really scary to sit with. And then the other 2 steps, which are clarity and discipline, we can talk about some other time. But I think that more in answer to what you asked, the second thing you asked, I think that as far as, the topic of advice, the way we're talking about it today is concerned, I think that just the ability to get quiet, to slow down, and said another way, to give yourself permission to just be present with your experience in this moment, whatever it is. And sometimes I remind people that you have like the dimmer switch. You're in control of how much of your experience you can bring into your awareness. So you don't have to, it's not like jumping off, headfirst into the swamp and you don't know what you're going to do and you can't swim. You can let just enough into your experience, into your ability to feel it and be present with it, that you could still breathe and you can still make distinctions about it, which is really important in itself. The ability, the more I can make distinctions about an experience, especially a physical one or a somatic one, the more distinctions I can make, the more I naturally can see that it is not me, that this energy or feeling that I'm having is not giving me evidence about some fundamental brokenness about me. It's not evidence of my incompetence or my unlovableness or my unworthiness, which is really, kind of the core story. Some version of that is everyone's ego. That's their core story.
Yeah.
So the feeling, at least I believe, is like your ego reinforcing that core belief. It's like just seeing, you see, I knew we couldn't do this, or another day that we have to survive, or whatever the feeling is telling us. And when we can be with it and be present with it, we begin to see that it has nothing to do with who we really are, that it's just something like a cloud passing through the sky. It has no relevance to the truth of who we are. And we can forget that sometimes.
Yeah. And looking at that, and I think we had a podcast on giving ourselves permission or something like that, or it came up as a major theme of one of the podcasts a little while back, and it is amazing to me. I've started employing that in my coaching sessions and my hypnotherapy sessions a lot more consciously than I was before. And in fact, a couple of times, I'll ask, are you willing to give yourself permission to do this exploration, or
Yes.
to go and do this activity or whatever? And oftentimes, now that yes that you just said, I mean, that was an emphatic and a congruent yes. But if I get somebody who kind of goes, well, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, right.
And it's very tentative, and it almost like the words that they're saying are saying yes, but the tonality of and all of the nonverbal cues are like, yeah, I'm willing to take a little good opportunity for your slider switch there. But oftentimes now I come back and I say, you answer that reflexively. Do me a favor, stop and check in and just ask yourself, go within and ask, will I give myself permission to go on this exploration, or to do this activity, or to make this change, or whatever it happens to be? And I see that with pain. And I've talked about this on this podcast before, that when I'm working with people who are in pain, I'll ask them, scale of 1 to 10, where's your pain? And it's not unusual that the answer is an 11, 12, or 13. And I'll come back to them and I say, okay, that's a reflexive response. But do me a favor, really check in, go inside your body, see what's going on there, and give me a deeper, accurate reading of what's going on. And again, it's not unusual that it comes back as a 5 or a 6, then with the explanation. But this morning I was really in a lot of pain when I got out, or today later I've got physical therapy and I know, I'm going to be really hurting tonight. So, it's a projection of what's going on. And we tend to answer things so reflexively, or at least my conditioning is, I need to have the right response now. Thinking about it, or taking some time, or let me get back to you on that, is something that I've had to learn to incorporate into my thinking. My condition was just, what's the answer, and fire it back emphatically when you're asked the question. So, that's been a point of self-inquiry as well. What do you think about receiving advice? How does that flow with you? And what have you noticed when people are offering either solicited or unsolicited advice? And is there something worth sharing there in your process?
I mean, I suppose I could be as put off as anyone, depending on the degree to which it was unsolicited, and the type of advice somebody might be giving. So there's quite a range there, I suppose. But I mean, I'd like to say, like, to speak to the possibility, kind of like what you said earlier, Bobby, about something is a really good opportunity for self-inquiry. And then I said, well, everything is. And you said, yeah, like if somebody gives me unsolicited advice, and I find myself getting, plugged in about that, or, indignant or whatever, how do they know who I am? Whatever, it's like, that is 100% for me to sit with and notice my reaction, and hopefully find it as silly in the moment as we just found it right now.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do. Sometimes I get caught in the, I was just writing something recently about, and it's really, I'm just ripping this off from Rupert Spira, and I don't know where he stole it from, but the idea of being an actor who forgets that they're in a play. So you're, like the play is over and I'm still speaking like King Lear. As my friends say, that was a beautiful performance. And I say, forsooth, thou dost, whatever. And I forgot that it's not a play, that this is, this is life now. And so the more I forget and the more I think I'm still in the play, and then here comes another character in the play that, offers me quote unquote, what was the word you used?
Unsolicited advice.
Unsolicited advice. If I'm still the character in the play, I might react however that character is supposed to react, with defensiveness, or, maybe you get obsequious and you go, oh, thank you, that's really kind of you, and really what I want to do is punch him in the throat. So who knows? And if I'm less identified with the character in the play, which, by the grace of God may happen every once in a while, then I might just, again, there's a range here. I might just smile and see that this is a well-meaning person, and, or, whatever, and not really make anything of it. Or I might do what I've seen Byron Katie do. Like she says, this is a much higher level in my mind. She said, if someone calls me a liar, I can always look back in my life and find a place where that's true. So it's not a problem to take someone's advice and just recognize that there's probably a grain of truth in it. And it's perhaps only my lack of humility that would prevent me from automatically listening for what is the grain of truth that I might receive from it. And I'll tell you one other quick thing about that just occurred to me. One other quick story. A dear friend and martial arts teacher, the guy that I trained martial arts with, his name is Gene, is friendly with a lot of special forces guys, like Navy SEAL people and stuff like that. And he said one of the guys he knows who in that world is like, just a badass of the highest order. He said, I watched him at the shooting range where the guy who was in the bay next to him, who had like 6 months shooting, was giving him advice, was giving the Navy SEAL advice. And he said, I watched you receive it like with so much equanimity. Obviously, this guy didn't know who he was talking to. And he said, when he asked him about it, he said, I'm amazed that you didn't like get upset or tell the guy, who do you, who I'm talking to, kind of thing. And he said, hey, man, I could learn something from everybody. So he wasn't just like tolerating it. He was actually listening. As one teacher of mine used to say years ago, would say, he listen for the 1% you don't already know. And I think that it's something interesting about being very accomplished, like a very highly skilled in wherever it may be, and the subsequent level of humility that rises with it, as opposed to the people who are highly skilled, but their ego rises with it. And so,
right.
Anyhow, maybe we're off the subject, but
no, I don't think so. That is, I notice that like with the stuff that I was going through last year, how I received it varied a lot as well. And I attribute that to it varied according to how I was doing inside. That Navy SEAL example, particularly being able to do it to patiently listen to it and take it in
Mhm.
and say, is there something that he's pointing out to me that I haven't recognized, or maybe something that I've forgotten? That seems to be at a very high, very resourceful state. And that person, or at least in my own experience, I know that there were times that getting unsolicited advice really repelled me. And I
Mhm.
don't, I hope I never just said, keep your mouth shut. I don't need your advice. I don't believe I ever reacted in that way uh, to anybody.
I
But
can't see you reacting that way, Bobby.
well, it is within the realm of possibility, but not when I've got a state of inner peace and inner calm. And so, we're doing the presence posse, and this is most of our interaction. So I make an effort to be very, very present, very non-stressed when we're doing these shows, but other times that's not the case. But I've noticed, like, sometimes I can be very generous of spirit and think to myself, it's kind that this person is offering advice, even though to me it sounds
Mhm.
like the advice is way off the mark. But I'm just appreciating the fact that this is somebody who cares enough about me to share the advice. And then there are other moments when I push back, I'm extremely resistant, anger is arising, and maybe I'm masking it well, but it's there. And I think the only difference is, maybe not the only difference, but one of the key differences is, how are we doing on the inside? What is our inner experience? And, I've used the example of the commuter before, who one day can be in a traffic jam and be totally blissed out listening to whatever he's listening. It may be his own thoughts, or she. And other days, same person, same road, surrounded by more or less the same people in the same car. And that traffic jam can be enough to get them to pull out a gun and blow out somebody's tire. The difference
Yeah.
is how we're doing on the inside. And I find that, to the degree I'm able to allow anxiety and anger and all of those things arising to be kind of a rumble strip on the highway of life, and catch myself. And
Mhm.
I think more or less I always catch myself. Sometimes it's not till days later. Other times it's in the moment. And when it is in the moment, that allows me to make just an interesting shift about, all right, what am I really getting angry about here? Here's a person who cares about me that's offering advice that they believe is going to be helpful. What's to get pissed about? And so that's kind of the self inquiry, self inquiry process. One of the triggers that I use to go inside and explore, and that exploration can be fascinating. And it can tell me, I think what it does for me is like the rumble strips. I've got this road here that I drive a couple of times a month. And right now, it's really tough to drive it because it's snowing. The road has no lights. It's a winding road, and it's just a 2-lane road. And so cars are coming at you. So you're looking at the headlights, and it can be a pretty stressful drive. It's one of the most dangerous roads in America. And, those rumble, and they've got rumble strips all up and down to keep you from drifting over into the other person's lane or drifting off the road. And sometimes it's only those rumble strips that let me know I've lost the road, because everything just looks the same. You can't see the lanes. All you see is this little gentle dusting of snow over everything in an oncoming vehicle. And so, yeah, and I find like sometimes I have access to that wisdom in the moment, and other times, as I said, sometimes it takes hours or days or weeks, and I think that's just an indication of how I'm doing, how present I am in the moment versus how much am I time traveling and distracted and thinking about other things and living mindlessly, not mindfully.
Yeah, I love the idea of rumble strips and, everything in life being a rumble strip. I mean,
Yeah.
some are like, grabbing you by the shirt collar, and some are a little more gentle. But I think it's a great way to think about it, that, we're either in the present, in this moment right now. And, it's all to such broad, like this, it's not a yes or no question. We can enter into this moment more and more completely, more and more, as our whole being, as opposed to, the kind of whatever range that I pull back from. So, uh, there's always rumble strips, is what I'm trying to say, that there's always some indication that shows me one more piece of my consciousness that I'm holding back, one more piece of my consciousness that is caught in appearance of something in the world, or even my own appearance, as opposed to just being present right here. And um, so, I mean, to me, it comes back to the declaration, and meaning, by declaration, I mean that I declare this to be true, what I'm about to say. It doesn't mean that I can factually prove to you that it's true. It means, the nature of a declaration, if you want to get into language, which is a cool study, is it literally means that we create it when we speak it. So like if I say, I love you, I don't have to show you evidence for that. I create it in the speaking of it. Um, but sorry, that's a complete tangent.
Oh no, I love it.
It's cool. I think it's cool too. But the point is, I declare that, we could say it different ways, right? Life is always conspiring on our behalf. That's the way I like to say it. Or, life doesn't happen to us, life happens for us.
Yeah. Or yeah.
Another one of those you have?
How does it? I was going to say I was almost in sync with you there. You said for us, and I was thinking through us.
Yeah, there's other, or even as us.
Yeah, yeah,
So I completely, we can use other language. The forest though has a different connotation, so it really just depends on from where you're looking when you say it. Because yes, life does happen as me. I think ultimately is the most accurate, or through me. Uh, the idea of saying that it happens for me is kind of an acknowledgement that yes, I still experience life as a separate me, and probably will continue to experience that separate me to some extent, perhaps lesser and lesser as I continue, but there'll always be a sense of me there. And as far as I can tell, that me will probably continue to have preferences or desires or whatnot. But as I continue along the path, perhaps um, uh, I will be able to see that the experiences that life offers me are only here for me to wake up and recognize more and more of the truth of who I really am, of what life
mm,
really is. Uh, so the for us, through us, as us. We might even use all four of them, right? Life happens to me.
yeah.
Life happens for me. Life happens through me. Life happens as me. As a
You
kind of
could act.
a
Seems like you could
perspective
add
of,
another one in there that life happens by me. There's a lot of people
yeah,
who,
sure. So there's maybe five stages, so to speak.
Hmm. Interesting to think about.
Yeah.
Do you like with your you mentioned some you didn't use blind spots, I don't think, that as a word, but you were talking about the things that you can't see, and I have those in my life too. But I've noticed over the last couple of years that that's not always consistent. I mean, sometimes I have a blind spot and I can't see things, and it might be something that I know, but like just in that moment, I'm not being able to access it. And then other times it's like so painfully obvious. It's surprising to me that I could ever not notice it. But those don't seem to be consistent necessarily either. I don't, is that your experience? Does that
Yeah.
resonate?
I mean, maybe somehow in the universe, it all comes down to like incredibly complex mathematics, and like the mathematics somehow result in my being very present and awake in one moment and very asleep and not, in another moment. And maybe that's all completely explainable by some cosmic equation that I don't currently have access to.
The
Um,
universal algorithm.
right, right, exactly. Um, Maybe it really is. I mean, maybe it's like if you could correlate like the exact value of the amount of sleep and the quality of sleep and the kind of food I was eating and what kind of activities, and who knows, the color of the paint on the walls. I mean, the endless factors that might contribute to my being awake or not, relatively awake. Um, so we begin to see that the experience, the appearance out there that I was referring to. Um, if we identify with the appearance and we identify with that constant roller coaster of where my attention is or something, um, it can be quite disorienting or disruptive or something. Um, the more that I can just watch the oh, I'm more awake now, I'm less awake now, that without getting caught up in it. Uh, I think generally speaking, at least speaking for myself, the happier I am. Um, if I'm sort of not very present, and I think I should be more present, well, then I've got two problems, maybe, right? That I'm not present, and I think I should be. Um, so I don't know. There's an awful lot of variables in life. I think it's difficult to control them as well as maybe we'd like to believe that we can.
Yeah, I think there seems to be some control. I do an exercise when I'm talking to groups where I get them to just kind of assess where they are on a scale. The bottom of the scale is one, which, they're the Buddha. They're in a
Hmm.
completely Zen, grounded state of mind, unshakable. 99, they're ready to run screaming from the room and get their uh, stress coping mechanism of choice, exercise or meditate or medicate or
Right.
whatever it is. And I have them just pick a number and notice where they are. Then I start to ask some questions and kind of present a little bit of information, which is by design supposed to get them agitated. And I
Hmm.
just get them to focus on the things that they could be doing that they're not yet, and explore why they're not doing them, and explore what it's costing them to not be doing those now.
Hmm.
And, just going through that mental process, you're going to start to, I'm asking you to visualize all of the shortcomings that you currently have in your life. And it very reliably gets people's stress level to increase.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I'll do that for a couple of minutes and just say, okay, stop and notice where you are now on the scale. And I did that with a group of about 20 people a couple of weeks ago. And when I did that, 19 of the people in the room, their hands went up. One didn't go up. And I said, how many of you stayed the same? Her hands still didn't go up. I said, did anybody's number go down? and her number went down, one person. And
Mhm.
that's really rare to do that. But that's all to set up a exploration of breath work and how we have the ability to influence our internal experience just by our breath. And so I teach them a breathing technique that takes about 3 to 5 minutes to go through the process. Alternate nostril breathing, you probably know it, where you're closing off one nostril and
Mhm.
switching on the inhale. And that's known in the meditating world as the meditator's cheat. And if you're going to sit down to meditate, but you've been running around and you're stressed out and you're running late and you really don't have time to meditate because you got too many things on your to-do list, people will often begin that breathing technique to just like slow things down a little bit. And the normal reaction is that 100% of the people, not always, but most of the time, are not only way down from where they were agitated, but they also now are below their baseline. So, it's just a way of inviting people to pay a little bit more attention to how are we doing on the inside. And, it's not total control, obviously. And anybody who knows any of these techniques can get lost. And obviously, you don't need the techniques, but, it is an interesting little hack where you can, at the very least, influence and bring yourself back to the moment. And I think what happens in the process of doing all of that is just a letting go of this tight grip, either that we have on life or life has on us, or maybe it's we both have each other by the collar. And it's just a relaxing of that for the time being, which brings us back. I think I don't know if it's your analogy with the snow globe, of the when the snow globe gets stirred
I know
up
the
and
analogy. I mean, I've heard it many times from many different people.
yeah, and that seems to be true. And the analogy is that we, through our mental activity and time traveling and all of that type of stuff, are agitating ourselves. And if we just pause for a moment and relax, then things tend to settle. Very reason, I believe, that aha moments rarely come to us in the moment when we need them. Oftentimes we get
Mhm.
frustrated and we decide, I need to set this aside, and we go for a walk or wash the dishes or pet the cat or do whatever, and all of a sudden, boom, that's it. And it's a relaxing of the activity of our conscious mind and a settling down of that just creates the space for the insight to occur, it seems.
Hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah,
You sound
it's
doubtful.
funny. What's that?
I said you sound doubtful.
No, 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 not at all. No, what would there be doubtful about there? Uh, no, more. I was just thinking, like, reflecting on what I said actually a moment ago before you started speaking. Like this idea that on some level there's so much going on, and it's a question about control. Like, how much are we in control? Are we not in control? Are we a little bit in control? In control, and I honestly don't know the answer to that question. And I am 100% on board with what you just said. Whatever it may be, the idea that yes, I can do breathing, or I can do any number of things, and I teach people tools and techniques so that they can be more present with their own experience. So I 100% um, agree with all of that. Uh, and at the end of the day, I I'm just being honest when I say that all could be part of the game too. You
Yeah,
know, uh, and it's so what? I mean,
yeah.
if part of the game is that I get to play the waking up part of the game, uh, then great, I'll play that part. and I'll do the exercises and the breathing and the meditating and all that stuff. And in my qualitative experience as a separate person, like when I'm, like I said, I'm still going to imagine that even though I can somehow make a case that we're not separate and that we're all this one love consciousness, whatever, I'm going to still experience it through me, through
Yeah.
myself and my history to whatever extent and my unique perspective on the world. We all have a unique perspective, and uh, so to the extent that that's always going to be the case to some extent, uh, did I just say to the extent that that's always going to be to some extent? What was that? The Department of Redundancy Department. Um, to that extent, I think that these tools will always have value. To the extent that maybe I have completely entered into the palace of oneness and love, maybe the tools don't seem relevant anymore.
Yeah.
But somehow along the way, they do seem very relevant. And, while other apparently separate people come to me and hire me to help them on this supposed journey that we're on from now to now,
From
from
here
here
to
to here,
here.
right? um, then we'll use whatever tools seem to make that journey more pleasant or more valuable, or whatever words we might apply to it. But maybe it's just where I am currently in my own inquiry, but it's like, I think seekers can get very caught up in the identity of seeking.
Yeah.
Um, and never underestimate the ego's craftiness. Like the moment you think you've given up one identity, it's like, I've got
Yeah.
another one
Got a
right here for
whole
you.
new
Yeah.
one.
Oh, you gave up your identity as a CEO to be a seeker. Oh, good for you.
I yeah, I can't remember the name of the person whose YouTube I saw that somebody in the audience asked this gentleman if he considered himself to be enlightened.
Mhm.
And he's just said, I just don't like that on a lot of levels. One level is the fact that it makes it seem as though there is something to achieve. But the
Mhm.
other thing is that seems like the ultimate role the ego would love to play.
Yep.
You want to be enlightened? I got this.
Yep. 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 And
Yeah.
and so, that whole spiritual ego trip is something that I'm as susceptible to as anyone. And so at the moment, I'm just trying not to take any of it that seriously. you know, and so we'll see where that takes me. Maybe next week you'll see me. I'll be, smoking and drinking.
Well, right now that hits me as a good piece of advice for anyone who is willing to receive it.
Yeah, willing, and if it's your time to receive it, it might
Yeah.
not have been time for
That's
me to receive it yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are coming up on the top of the hour, and you know what? I have not been doing a good job with my banners, so let me.
Well,
I'll put your information up there at the bottom, but just tell some folks. I know one of the things that I like about the way that you do the work is all of your relationships begin with an initial exploration, which you offer to anybody who's interested in having it. Just get a feel for, and you say it much better than I do. So let me just turn it over to you to let people know how they can get a hold of you.
well, I mean, I don't know. It's the banner, the little thing is moving very spottily across my screen because I have bad internet at the moment. But I assume, yeah, there it is. My email address. You can reach out to me there at Dr. Fred at energyrichliving.net. Or here on Facebook, wherever it is that you'd like to reach out to me is fine. And yeah, I think what Bobby was saying was that if anything that that I've shared here today resonates with you, and you'd like to maybe see how it would apply to some challenge or goal or whatever that you have in your own life, um, reach out to me, and we'll set up some time to talk. And there's no charge for that first conversation. It's really just a chance for us to get to know each other and to see if this work that I offer can be of service to you. And that's really all that this is about, is finding out how I can serve truly. And if we find out that I can, if it seems like a good fit, we can explore what that looks like. And if it doesn't, for whatever reason, then that's awesome too. It's one of my favorite things in the world, really, to have these conversations with people and to help people along this imaginary journey that we're on, to help them become a little bit more awake and embodied and engaged in this life that we have. So um, I don't really I can't imagine that I ever would regret having one of these conversations, regardless of whether someone becomes a client or not. So if anyone out there would like to have one of those conversations, reach out. And I'd like to hear more about you, Bobby.
Well, thank you, Fred.
You're welcome.
I'm Bobby Cobb. I am a liberation hypnotist and a mindfulness coach. Easiest way to reach out to me currently actually is in my Facebook group, which is called Our Mindful Life. It's a free group to join. I've got some of the past Presence Posse things that we've done in there. And in March, I'm going to be offering a class, a program, I don't know what the right word for it is, called Mindful Mondays, where we're going to be diving into some mindfulness practices and talking about some of the different ways that incorporating presence and mindfulness in your life can just change the experience for most people in a pretty interesting and positive way. I read a stat. I don't know if it's accurate or not, and I don't know where they get these numbers, but some neuroscientists recently said that we think roughly 60,000 thoughts on a daily basis, and 95,500 or something like that are the same ones that we thought the day before, and the day before that, and the day before that. And we live oftentimes in a very conditioned and automated type world, which is fine. It's a superpower, and it's, integrating things where we can do them mindlessly is a goal of accomplishing any type of activity that we do. But pausing and just kind of deconstructing your process a little bit and seeing if there's an opportunity to add an effectiveness layer by inviting a little bit more presence in your life, and then reconstructing it is a pretty cool and fun exploration. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to take people through that. So that begins in March. If you have an interest in doing this, and if you're watching this live, I will also tell you that we have not all, but we are in the process of putting all of our past talks. I think we're up to around 22 actually in any podcatcher, Google Play or Apple Podcasts or Audible or Stitcher. I believe we're on all Spotify. Yeah, I think we're on all of those platforms. YouTube and Spotify, you can watch the video version. Everywhere else, you just get the audio version. So if you want to see Fred's handsome face,
or not,
as he's making his point, that's where you go. So thank everybody very much for tuning in. Fred, thank you very much for the
thank you, Bobby. Thank
generosity
you,
of your presence and time. Appreciate it. And we'll see you guys next week on another Presence Posse Presents.
Thanks,
Bye-bye
everyone.
for now.